Chapter 31 Murin. King's Landing. POV of Domeric Bolton. I didn't know that we were going to King's Landing in order to steal women and little boys. Euron Greyjoy, or Murin, as it's now called, said with a laugh, and Domeric rolled his eyes as the half-demented pet gazed lustfully at the women. They're not here for the reason you think, Murin, he said before he thought about it and said, well, the women are whores, you're correct in thinking that. But I've not brought them on board for that purpose. Neither are the boys for that purpose either. Then what? You want to marry them? Murin asked sarcastically. No, they'll build a spy network for me. He explained to the man whom he had saved from freezing off at the wall a few months ago. Despite his sadistic tendencies, Domeric had no doubt that Euron Greyjoy was one of the best sea captains in the Westeros. That is why he rescued the man from freezing off at the wall and took his time to make sure that the man was loyal to him. Then he used some high-level transfiguration to grow his missing left eye, as well as changed his face to a degree that no one else would ever be able to recognize him as Euron Greyjoy. And now the man worked as his fleet admiral. Not that he had much of a fleet at the moment, but he'll have one in the future. Spy network. The man spat before his mind started working a mile a minute, and he nodded reluctantly. I guess such a thing would be useful to you, unless you can use your magic and find out about everything that goes around in the Seven Kingdoms. No. If could do that, then why would I waste my time in building a spy network? He asked, but then gestured for the man to stop talking. Take care of these girls and travel to Myr next. From there we'll go to Tyrosh and Lys. As you say, my lord. Murin bowed deeply, though he could feel the sarcasm dripping out of each word that he said. Apparently being loyal to him didn't mean that Murin would stop using his unwanted sarcasm at him. Report to me once you reach your destination, he ordered, and Murin gave him a nod. And what'll you be doing until then? Murin asked. You're not even old enough to wet your cock on a nice and wet pussy. No, and it's a damn good thing, otherwise I would be rather distracted with all the pussies that are being offered to me these days. He said, no, I'll be planning for the expedition at the north of the wall. Don't see what you find so tempting that you would be willing to freeze off your balls in that desolate land. But it's your funeral. Murin joked, and he rolled his eyes before he said goodbye and portkeyed back to Dreadfort. Dreadfort Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. How are the troops coming along? He asked Walton as they looked at the 1,000 men running laps around Dreadfort early in the morning just before dawn. It was rather cold outside, but these men needed to prepare for cold if they were to be of any use to him at the north of the wall, the true north. They aren't worth the food they eat. Walton grunted. Domeric almost let out a sigh at the man's bluntness and his bad review of the men he was training. Because regardless of what Walton said, a simple use of legitimacy told him that the men were coming along well and that Walton was secretly rather proud of them. How long until they're ready for the expedition north of the wall? He asked. You're too impatient, Walton retorted without any heat in his voice. He felt that he needed to chastise the man, but then he realized that Walton was not wrong in saying that. Yes, I'm a bit impatient. Things are always so slow in this world. He murmured to himself and lamented the time it took for things to happen in this world. Even traveling from Dreadfort to Winterfell took a whole week of his time if he didn't use magical means of transportation. A journey that would have hardly taken a day for a modern-day human with access to a car or a bike. Don't worry. Give them 2 moons worth of time and they'll be ready for the expedition. And if they're not? He asked. Then they'll die, Walton said in his brutally honest way with a shrug, as if the lives of these men weren't worth a damn. But he couldn't blame Walton for that kind of thinking when more than 95% of lords and ladies think the same way when they look at the small folk. Something that would only change once he started educating the small folk. And that was not going to happen in a fortnight. Did Lord Stark reply to my message? He asked to his aunt, who had remained strangely silent up until this point. Maybe because she was pissed that he woke her up so early in the morning. Yes, he asks for the reason behind your expedition. His aunt replied frostily, and he added waking her up in the morning to his list of things that he would not repeat again. Then send him a letter and tell him the reason behind the expedition, he said, and could see Walton trying to listen to their talks. It was understandable, as aside from him and his aunt, no one else knew why he was preparing for the expedition to the north of the wall. The real reason. His aunt's gaze fell back upon him as she scrutinized him for a long moment before she asked, Are you sure? I don't think Lord Stark would believe us if that's what we tell him. And even if he did, he'll likely think of us as fools more than anything else. Let him think what he will about us as long as he permits us to travel north beyond the wall, he said without any worry. And if he doesn't? She asked. Then I'll pay him a visit myself, I replied, but he knows better than to deny me my request, especially when I named his son Bran Stark my heir in case I perish north of the wall. He could see that his aunt was worried about him, so he simply put a hand on her hands and gave her a sweet smile. Don't worry. You know what I'm capable of. And we both know that nothing will happen to me. Do we? She asked as her worry turned into anger at his reckless behavior. Yes, even if we are ambushed by the wildlings north of the wall, I'll just use my port key to come back here, I said with a smile, and she gave him a hesitant nod which was followed by a shaky smile. As we were talking, the recruits, quite a few of them were the veterans of the Greyjoy Rebellion and Robert's Rebellion, finished their lap across the Dreadfort and were then drilled even further by Walton and his men. Chapter 32, Love-Hate Relationship. 7th and last bonus chapter of the week. Dreadfort Castle. POV of Domeric Bolton. Any other news for me, Auntie? He asked, and she gave him a nod before she climbed on top of her horse and told him to follow her. He gave a nod, climbed back on Grim's back, and followed behind her as she led him toward the section of the river where he had built the water wheels and the blast furnace. You were right, she said after a long silence as they reached the large furnace that was empty at the moment. So, they completed it? He asked after a long silence, and the look on her face, which reminded him of someone who had eaten a sour lemon, made him laugh at her. They did, she said bitterly. The first day when Master Tobomot ran the furnace, he produced 40 steel ingots within 6 hours. 40 steel ingots. Can you believe that? She asked with a slight fascination, and he had a feeling that she had a love-hate relationship with the blast furnace. Love because of how beneficial it was for them. Hate because it proved her wrong. And despite all her good qualities, he knew that his aunt was a woman who could hold her grudge for a long time over really petty matters. So instead of egging her on, he simply gave a nod and asked, How many steel ingots have they been producing every day since then? About 150 steel ingots over 3 shifts per day. She replied curtly. And the quality of that steel? He asked. I don't know much about such things, but Tobomot informed me that the steel produced here is even more sturdy than castle-forged steel. Armor and weapons made from it will be highly sought after once they are released to the market. I see, he said and hummed a little before asking, I believe that even all the blacksmiths in the castle combined are not able to deplete our steel ingot supply? She laughed at his words. It was not a derisive laugh, but a laugh filled with amusement. No, they are not even able to finish 1/3 of the steel ingot that we produce every day. And now, instead of pig iron, our warehouses are filled with high-quality steel. Not for long, he replied, and she looked at him with a raised eyebrow, asking him what he meant by those words, and he smiled back at her before taking out a parchment from his bottomless pouch and giving it to her. She unrolled the parchment and looked at the diagram drawn in it before she looked back at him once again. I don't understand what it is. I can see that it will be using the power from the river judging by the water will drawn in it. But I don't know what the rest is all about. She returned the parchment to him. You might as well tell me what that is. It's a water wheel-powered hammer. He replied, the water wheel will supply the power to raise the large hammer before letting it fall on the steel ingot. This will save the blacksmith's hours of time in forging armor and swords along with other equipment. It'll definitely take some time for them to set up this design and even more time to get used to it, but in the end, it'll increase the supply of steel products created by us by a huge amount. As he finished, he could see that his aunt was enamored by the whole idea. After all, high-quality steel was more valuable than pig iron, and high-quality weapons and armor were more valuable than high-quality steel ingot. The more armor and weapons that they produce in Dreadfort, the more easily they'll be able to arm their men. And once they've armed all their men properly, they'll be able to sell the remaining steel products to the other houses, gaining more gold, which will lead to more prosperity. She was right in her views in a way, except for the fact that even if gold did bring prosperity to the people of a kingdom, there were other ways to make a place more prosperous. Give it to Master Tobomot when he wakes up in the morning, he said. He'll understand what to do with the design. His aunt gave a nod and then carefully pocketed the design in her pocket as he wondered how long it would take for the blacksmiths to forge these water wheels. Maybe a month, maybe less, maybe more. The point was that when it does, he'll start making steel plows and other such things for the small folk in huge quantities so that they'll be able to increase their harvest even more in the future. That would definitely be more useful to him than making weapons and selling them to other houses. You're leaving already? His aunt asked sadly, and he realized that he had indeed not spent a lot of time with her since the start of the Greyjoy rebellion. Yeah, sorry about that, Auntie, he said with a bitter smile, but knew that he needed to leave in order to search for children of forest or information about how to create heart trees. He also planned on searching for priceless artifacts like Valyrian steel blades and dragon eggs once he was out there on his search, but knew that he had to use his magic wisely, as there were very few weirwood trees in the world right now. Regardless, having a simple breakfast with his aunt wouldn't delay him too much. Chapter 33, Book of Glassmaking. Free City of Mir, Essos. POV of Domeric Bolton. Beautiful girls, little boys, and now old men. Is there no end to your perversions? Murin asked as Domeric deposited the last glassmaker in the ship. Infiltrating Mir's glass facilities and stealing their formula and these men had been a hard task for him. But he had done it. A short while ago he gained the Book of Glassmaking from his altar tattoo as a reward. He hesitated a little but decided to choose the book over upgrading the tattoo. If he upgrades the tattoo, he could get more valuable green items or rewards the next time the tattoo becomes full. But there was a problem. A higher level tattoo meant a higher level of magic capacity, which also meant he would have to wait much more for the next sacrifice for items. So he decided to upgrade his tattoo after finding a way to create more heart trees. Also, glass was a rarity in this world and thus very valuable. So, making glass meant that he would gain prestige across the world and the prosperity of their land would increase. And more prosperity meant attracting people. Peasants seeking a more comfortable life and merchants seeking more profits would flock to his lands, which is what exactly he needed at the moment. And after seeing how they made their glass, he was sure that he could make better ones. He was also sure that by doing so, he would be declaring himself an enemy of the Magisters of Mir. But you cannot befriend everyone. And if he wanted to bring reform in this world, then he'd probably step on a lot of toes. This fact was insinuated when Citadel and Faith filed their complaints against him in the small council, because his cheaper and higher quality books led to them not being able to sell most of their own books. The High Septon even had the audacity to ask him for the design of the printing press for the Faith, so that they would be able to spread the message of God to more people. So now that you're here, what else do you want from Tyrosh and Lys? Murin asked curiously. The man was no doubt a sadist and a psychopath, but as long as Murin was loyal to him, it was okay. There are many slave fighting pits in Tyrosh, and some of them have people in them that have been fighting in those pits for years. People who are experienced in the art of killing. People who I could use. So, you want the slaves to fight for you instead? Murin asked in amusement, and he gave a curt nod. Of course, he did not doubt that he'd have to use a lot of Imperius and compulsion charms to buy or steal those experienced fighting slaves. But it was a price he was willing to pay for good sworn shields. Free City of Tyrosh, Essos. POV of Domeric Bolton. Once they reached Tyrosh, it took him and his crew a whole week to find all the top gladiators in Tyrosh. What do you think about his skills? Murin asked, and he shook his head. He is very skilled, probably one of the best fighters I've ever seen, if not the best. I want him to become my sworn shield and my mentor for swordsmanship, he said as he looked at the middle-aged man who was dual-wielding 2 swords in the arena against 3 people at once. The man named Varko was one of the gladiator champions in the fighting pits and had been fighting for 5 years in the pits. The fact he was still alive and kicking even after 5 years of continuous fighting showed just how good of a fighter he was. I've seen Jaime Lannister and Barristan the Bold fight once. Murin mused to himself. I would say that this guy is as good as them. Are you sure? He asked skeptically, and Murin nodded confidently. Good. That means I can make him the best fighter in the Westeros with some resources. How much will the Tyroshi Magisters ask for him if I wanted to buy him? He asked, and Murin instantly shook his head. They would not sell such a champion to anyone, Murin said. But what if they did? Humor me. Between 800,000 to 1 million gold dragons, if I must guess, Murin said. His jaw almost dropped at that number. How the fuck does a single slave sell for that much? I know what you're thinking, Murin said with a smirk. But look at all the people in the arena. Most of them have come here to see their champion fight against high odds and get his victory regardless. I see, he said as he looked at the tens of thousands of men and women shouting for blood as Varko played with the last man remaining in the arena. So, kidnapping it is. Yup, as if the Tyroshi Magisters would have ever given us anything cheaply. Very well, you were right. I was wrong. Now tell me about the other gladiator champions in these fighting pits that I might be interested in. He asked as he cast a tracking charm on Varco and left the pits along with Murin. There is this woman, Murin said as they walked out of the pits. Her name is Raxa the Giant. And you'll not believe me, but she is almost as big as the mountain. He turned to look at Murin after those words, and the ship captain gave him a shrug. Don't look at me. I was as surprised as you were when I first heard about her. She has been in these pits for 7 years. Though some people even say that she's half mad. So I don't know how useful she'll be to you. I'll find some use for her, he said as they went into an alley and apparat back to their ship. Author's note. You folks also can read up to plus 42 chapters on MTP at Trian Page as an early access privilege. You can also read plus 2 free chapter and see some pictures as a free member. www.patreon.com/vanguard_v. Next chapter's name, CH34, Varco. CH35, Raxa the Giantess. Chapter 34 Varco. First bonus chapter of the week. Free City of Tyrosh, Essos. POV of Varco. Varco was sleeping on his straw mattress and thinking about the life he had lost 5 years ago when he was caught by the slavers and sent into these pits. He looked at the locket given to him by his beloved. She was probably already happily married to someone else by this point, but he couldn't help but think of her even now. To be frank, not her but his life before the pits and his freedom. The locket was the only thing that reminded him of the freedom he had once. And without it, he would truly have lost all will to live by now. Thankfully, he had managed to hide the locket from slavers when they stripped him naked and searched his whole body by eating it and vomiting it out when it was safe to do so. He was thinking about the fight he'd have to participate in within a few days. There was nothing else to do in this cell. He tried not to think about his freedom or future, because he knew what would come after hope, pure desperation. In desperation, he would lose his will to live and perish in the pits. He doesn't want to die yet. He wants to live. Then he heard a large explosion at the other end of the fighting pits. He quickly got up from the mattress and looked outside from his prison cell but couldn't make out anything except for the red hue above the building denoting that the explosion had probably led to the fire. Just as he was thinking what could have happened there, a second and a third explosion shook the place, and the guards looking over them either ran to subdue the fire or escape with their own lives. "Hey, wait!" he shouted desperately as he caught one of the fleeing guards. "What about us? We'll die if we remain here." "None of my business, scum," the guard shouted back and slammed him with the back of his spear before escaping on his own. He felt a slight concussion in his head and raised his head to see the fire coming closer to them as the heat within his prison cell rose to a higher degree, and he started looking around for a way to get out of this place when he heard a voice. "Do you want to leave this place?" The voice was so calm and so out of place that he instantly stopped what he was doing, looked at the source of the voice, and was a little disgruntled when he found himself looking at a 9 to 10-year-old boy. "Get out of here, boy, or you'll die along with us." He snarled and was a little surprised at the little humanity that he was able to show despite how many people he had killed to this day in the fighting pits. "I asked you a question. Do you want to leave this place?" The boy asked once again, ignoring the heat easily even though he himself was starting to sweat profusely because of it. Only then did the words of the boy register in his mind, and he quickly ran toward the bar of his prison and asked the boy in a desperate voice, "Can you free me?" The boy gave him a nod and said, "If you promise to serve me for a year, then I'll free you." He thought about the boy's words for a moment and realized that being a slave to a boy for 1 year was definitely better than being a slave to the magisters for his entire life, and quickly gave him a nod. The boy gave him a nod of his own before handing him a piece of wooden amulet, and his heart plummeted. "What is this?" he asked, losing all the hope he had gained so far. So, the boy didn't plan on freeing him and was just playing with him until now. "It's a port key," the boy replied in a perfectly calm voice as the fire started getting closer to them. "Now hold it and say, 'Back to ship.'" "What?" "Just say, 'Back to ship,'" the boy said calmly, and he wondered if the boy was crazy or what. "Just do it," the boy said, and he finally had had enough, so he threw the wooden amulet down on the floor and snarled at the boy, "No, I've had enough of your games, boy. So, either let me out of this place or leave." The boy looked at him silently for a long moment before he finally shrugged his shoulders. "Very well. You leave me with no choice then." Then a stick appeared at the boy's hand, and he pointed the stick to him. "Imperio." All of a sudden, his mind dulled and he felt a sense of calmness wash over him. Then the boy said something, and the idea of picking up the wooden amulet, or port key as the boy called, it seemed rather good. So, he picked up the stone and repeated the phrase that the boy had told him about, and the next moment, he felt something pull at him at the navel and felt himself being squeezed through a thin tube, and then he promptly arrived in a dark prison cell. What? Was as far as he went before his mind cleared and he emptied his lunch on the floor. Chapter 35 Raxa the Giantess. Free City of Tyrosh. POV of Domeric Bolton. You're right. She is half mad. Domeric commented as he watched the 8-foot-tall woman snarling at him from inside her prison cell as she tried to bite through the steel bar. It had come to him as a huge surprise when she had initially been able to bend the steel bars out of shape, and he had to quickly stun the woman so that she wouldn't escape her cell. Then he transfigured the bars back to their original shape and cast the unbreakable charm on it. Now she was no longer able to bend the bars with her pure strength. But that didn't stop her from trying. You sure you still want it? Murin asked, because I'm sure that we'll be able to sell it to the other slavers at a very hefty sum. She's a her, not an it. And yes, I'm very good at mind arts and will be able to heal her with enough time, he said as he then turned to the next cell where Varko was quietly sitting in his new bed and staring at him. You promised to serve me for 1 year in exchange for freeing you from the fire, he said. I did, but I didn't know that you were a Megi, the man said with a snarl. Clearly, he had some prejudice against mages and wizards from this world. And if what he had heard about these Megi and warlocks was correct, then he didn't blame the man. So, you plan on breaking our agreement? He asked, and Varko stared back at him for a long time before he shook his head. No, a deal is a deal. I'll serve you for a year. Then use your blood and thumb to sign this contract, he said, and gave a piece of paper to the man who scrutinized it for a moment with a frown. I can't read. What does it say? He asked. It says that you'll serve me faithfully for a year, and if you betray me during that time, then you'll forfeit your life and the magic in the contract will kill you. The man looked a bit disconcerted for a time before he finally let out a sigh in defeat and bit his thumb before using the blood and thumb to sign it. Good. Now I just need to repeat this process a few dozen times more, he said with sarcasm as he looked at the other cells which were filled with gladiators from the slavers' pit. None of them were as good as Varko or Raxa the Giantess, but they were still far better than any average knight in the Westeros. And once he arms them with magically charmed weapons and armor, they'll be a force to be reckoned with. But first, he must win their loyalty, which would mean spending a good amount of time among these people. Oh well, he was sure that he'd be able to find some time for them, and he had to heal Raxa's mind sooner or later, so why not do it now? Free City of Lys. POV of Domeric Bolton. It took them another moon's worth of time to reach Lys. Then 2 more weeks to find the best pleasure slaves that were also smart enough to gather information for him. During their time here, he also bought any slave who was literate, because sooner or later, he'd open a school for his troops and the small folk. So, he wanted as many teachers in his hands as possible. Not to mention that as his lands advanced, he'd need more educated people who would be able to follow his orders written on parchments. Aside from that, Aunt Barbary called him with the mirror and told him that Lord Stark had permitted him to go on an expedition north of the wall. Now he only needed to get the permission of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and he knew exactly how to do it. So it shouldn't be a problem. As for the gladiator slaves that he rescued from the slaver pits in Tyrosh, they have all signed the contracts with their blood and won't be able to betray him without losing their lives. The constant use of compulsion charm has also made them more amiable to his suggestions as well as more loyal to him. He was certain that by the time he reached back home, all these men and women would become loyal to him and wouldn't try to leave even when he gave them their freedom. There was also the headache that he was suffering because of Raxa. After reading her mind, he quickly understood why she had gone half mad. The reason for that was that she was sold to a house of freaks at a very young age by her parents because of her being far taller than any girl had the right to be. Then before she was even 10 years old, she was captured by slavers and raped repeatedly by them before being sold to pleasure houses that catered to the needs of men with different tastes. But once she grew up and people found out about her immense strength, she was once again sold as a gladiator to the fighting pits. The truth was that Raxa was only 22 years old at the moment. That someone so young to suffer so many cruelties in her life saddened him to no end. He'd already erased a good portion of her memories, which led to deep trauma in her mind. The unintended side effect was that Raxa's mind had once again turned into that of an 8-year-old child's mind. Imagine that. An 8-foot-tall woman with the mind of an 8-year-old girl. Thankfully, she had spent 7 whole years fighting in the pits, so she was able to regain back her fighter's instincts after a bit of sparring with Varko. the only man on the ship who was able to provide her with a challenge. At least she was not half mad anymore. Now he just had to teach her not to hug him fiercely, or one day she might break all the bones in his body.